these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Americans are watching China go through what seems like an unprecedented level of protest in China, as Chinese officials are using every tool that they have to both spy on their citizens and block the free flow of information. At the same time, they are exporting the ability to track and collect data on American citizens through apps like TikTok and companies like Huawei and ZTE. The Federal Communications Commission is on the front lines working to protect American citizens from these threats. And Commissioner Carr joins us again to discuss all of this. Brendan, thanks for being back on. So last time I saw you, we were climbing this big cell tower in my district. That's like a thing you do.
Yeah, so good to see you again. Great to be down on the ground with you. Whenever I get out of D.C., and I try to spend as little time in D.C. as possible in this job, I like to get up in the air with tower crews. They're doing the tough work to connect all of us, particularly during the pandemic. Most people just assume their phone's going to work, their TV's going to turn on, their computer's going to fire up, but it's these men and women that are climbing these towers. So it was great to get up 200 or 300 feet with you. That was pretty impressive. I know people may not tell from a podcast, but I have a bureaucratic physique, so I'm scrawny, I'm bald, and for me to get a chance to climb a tower with a former Navy SEAL was something. So I had to train for it, did some running, I actually did a pull-up, pulled a muscle in my shoulder, trying to do a pull-up to make sure that I could keep up with you on that tower, but had a lot of fun.
Not using enough legs to get up there. Yeah, that was fun. I've never climbed a tower before. It was cool. Quite the view from up there. Yep. So, and real quick, really briefly before we get into TikTok and some of the intricacies on that and a few other topics. Again, let's remind the audience, what is the FCC? What is it you guys do exactly? Obviously, you oversee things like cell towers. Otherwise, you wouldn't be climbing them all the time. So give us a quick synopsis to the American public. What is this organization?
Yes, the FCC is about 1,300 or 1,400 people. It's headed by 5 commissioners. I'm one of them. 3 are of the president's party, 2 are in the minority. So I'm working my way slowly into the minority of the FCC. And the way to think about it is sort of a mini Congress for tech and telecom. We vote on things that can enable the 4G to 5G transition. We're helping to authorize this new generation of low Earth orbit satellites.
Yeah, that's one thing I want to ask you about.
We do that as well. And then we administer this program called the Federal Universal Service Fund, which is a $9 billion a year fund to try to support rural internet builds where there's no private sector business case. And any company that's a license, so AT&T or T-Mobile that wants to do a merger or transaction, they have to come before the FCC. And then we do some stuff. Section 230, which is very famous, is actually Section 230 of the Communications Act.
Right.
And so I think we have a role there to play.
Right.
In terms
was that the topic of last time we talked, I think?
That was a big focus last time. Yeah. So it's in the Communications Act, and I think we should step in there and put some pro-speech guardrails in place. We've yet to do that, but that's one area where I think we could be more active.
Yeah. Well, Republicans have a ton of legislation. There's like 50 bills in ENC just kind of ready to go. Not all of which I even think are great, but it's a good start. Mine in particular simply adds a little section of 230 that protects political speech. Basically uses the same language as you would use in non-discrimination law.
That's so important. In fact, Texas as a state passed a similar law, similar to what your bill would do as well, non-discrimination against political viewpoints. It was appealed. It was recently upheld on appeal by the Fifth Circuit. In that case, I assume is potentially headed to the Supreme Court. So I think we're going to see a lot of activity here, both in the courts and Congress, on this concept of non-discrimination for participating in what's effectively a digital town square.
Right. And wow. Well, now I kind of want to get into the Elon Musk thing because we're already moving in that direction. But just for the audience, we are going to talk about banning TikTok, okay, like and the ramifications of that. But since we're already on this free speech path, let's stay there. What do you think? I mean, Elon Musk. I'm not sure what Elon Musk thinks about it because he was trying to get out of that deal. I never would have urged him to buy Twitter. I think Twitter's just a cesspool, and I'm not. And I have the same questions he has always had, right? Like, how many bots are on this? How many real people are really on Twitter? Is this really worth it? But maybe he'll make it worth it. I don't know. He's obviously moving to this more of a subscription model. That seems smart if you're trying to make money, but is that going to make people use it less? I mean, how many people use it anyway? What's your just first reaction to the whole thing? Have we been watching Elon just go like head first into this?
Yeah, one of the most interesting things to me with Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter is it's really further exposed a free speech divide in this country. You know, it wasn't very long ago that free speech, diversity of views was a very progressive viewpoint.
Yeah, you would
in
think
fact,
so.
if you go back, the modern day op-ed launched on the pages of the New York Times in 1970 because the then editor, John Oakes, said that diversity of opinion is the lifeblood of democracy. The moment we insist that everyone think the same way we do, our democratic way of life was in jeopardy. He wanted views in the New York Times that were different than what you would hear, divergent in his views, from the New York Times editors. And now, flash forward 50 years, the New York Times is actually on the front end of enforcing orthodoxy, and they don't want opinion in their pages that's different from them. So I think that's really been exposed by Elon Musk. You have a lot of people that want more censorship, more control, and this entire idea that somehow free speech is a threat to democracy is just, antithetical. And the White House just this week saying that they were keeping an eye on Twitter.
Yeah, we're keeping an eye on Twitter.
Yeah, I don't really know.
Elon Musk, like, what is so dangerous about Elon Musk? This guy who's created SpaceX and Teslas. I thought you guys loved all this shit. I mean, it's kind of baffling. But it's also interesting to watch because it's interesting to watch how Elon, and he's like a more controlled Trump, right? He says everything he thinks on Twitter. And it's fascinating. You get a feel for his brain and how he's moving through this. And he's trying to figure it out. Like he's so transparent about how he's trying to figure out the next steps. He's asking questions like, should we do this? Should we do that? And it does bring up something that I've always noticed when we talk about censorship, which is there has to be some kind of management of content on a social media platform. Otherwise, it becomes unusable. And Elon Musk, I've seen him deal with this, right? Like it's like he's not going to ban speech, but he still will ban speech that as he said is like negative, or I can't remember the other word he used, but negative speech. And it's like, well, we're right back to square one here now, because how do you define that? And now, look, I think the way he would define it is probably better for conservatives than, because I don't think he would define it as political speech. I think he would define it, I think he wants it to be a nice place. I think if I'm understanding how his mind is working, he just wants it to be a place where, like, you actually just get information and you talk about your kids, and, there's like news sites there and counter news to that news. I mean, but just not a place where you're screaming at each other and trying to destroy each other. I think I think that's his utopia. As far as I can tell, I don't know how you get there because people are assholes. Right. This is my podcast, so I can say whatever I want. You can swear too if you want.
Yeah, and the FCC, we have no jurisdiction to censor profanity on the podcast. So yeah, let's let it rip.
But you guys are the ones who censor on cable news.
Broadcast.
Broadcast
TV, that's right.
Well,
so
you know what? That's fine. I'm okay with that. You shouldn't be saying whatever you want. Kids watch that.
Well, I think you're right. I think the most important thing is basically what you're getting at is a First Amendment standard, which is how do we protect core political speech from discrimination, from censorship? At the end of the day, if we can't talk about every single potential perspective on a main public problem, we are weaker as a country from solving it. Why can't we discuss the potential origins of COVID-19? Why can't we discuss the efficacy? That's
where it got crazy.
Of masks,
or ivermectin.
Right. Do vaccines help you from dying and going to the hospital, or do they also stop transmission? We need to be able to discuss all of that, and we couldn't because you had, the centralization of control on social media. And I think the path forward, to your point, has to be something like the First Amendment standard, which is we have defined core political speech. We know what it is. We deal with it in all sorts of contexts. It's that type of speech that should be protected from censorship. In my view, I think the digital town square and promoting speech is so important that we shouldn't simply rely on the hopefully benevolent censorship or content moderation, even of Elon Musk. And I think that's why your legislation and others is so important to step in and say, look, if you're expressing a political view, I don't care if it's Elon Musk or someone else owning a platform, they shouldn't be able to censor and shut that down. But that should be the goal. That allows you to censor, incitement of violence, things that aren't protected by the First Amendment, child porn, and you don't have to have that stuff on these websites, but you can still protect core political speech.
Right. It will forever be a thorny issue that you have to attack with a scalpel, not a hammer. And I do think a lot of our legislation gets at that point because you don't want to destroy the internet either. And we just have to decide as a country, once these platforms are big enough, are they the town square? And I think our general view on the conservative side is yes, they're somewhat like a utility. They're somewhat like a town square. They've become so big that they can't be seen as just, hey, it's just another mom and pop shop trying to, it's not the cake baker.
Right.
It's not the cake baker just baking whatever cake they want. Yep. Okay. And it's different and it's unprecedented. And our founders, they could foresee a lot of things. They couldn't foresee this. I mean, I think It's too much.
You're exactly right. And, one analogy that I look to, which is a rough analogy, but is cable. In the 1990s, Congress decided that being on cable was vital to the economic well-being of broadcast TV. And so Congress said, look, you local cable channel, cable company, cable operator, you don't have carte blanche to decide what broadcast TV signals to put on your system and not, because it's too important to be there. So Congress stepped in with some guardrails and regulated that went to the Supreme Court and was upheld. And I think that's sort of the path forward, which is whatever the merit of being on cable in the 90s, it's that much more important to be on social media today. And so
That
we
is an
should say, look,
interesting
you
analogy.
don't have carte blanche to pick and choose which speech to carry or not. Child porn, fine. Incitement of violence, fine. But if it's expressing a core
You mean
political
not
view-
fine?
Yeah, well, fine. Fine to censor it. Fine to censor it.
Just to clarify your position on this. It's in the news. It's in the conservative news and all lately. We have a right to stop those things. Okay, so we like free speech, right? We want these platforms to have free speech, but not TikTok. Screw TikTok. Okay, so let's go to TikTok. Why should we ban TikTok? And I think people are generally following this issue. They know that the reason like Trump wanted to ban it, the reason we're also skeptical of TikTok is because it's a backdoor for China. And there's a few roads I want to go. Well, let's just start with your letter on this. This was your strongest opposition to TikTok that you specifically have stated. So run us through your arguments about why we're at the point now where you can't even negotiate with TikTok anymore. Because some background is, well, why don't you tell us the background, because you'll explain it better than I can about the negotiations with making it a U.S. parent company, where that's gone, why you think that's no longer a viable option, why we should just get rid of it and make our poor teenagers, I don't know, live in despair and just a dark world where they might have to actually talk to each other and climb trees and shit and do whatever else we did as teenagers.
Well, there's no question TikTok is immensely popular in America with young people in this country. A lot of people look at it, they say, well, it's just a fun platform for sharing videos and dance memes. And the reality is that's just the sheep's clothing. Underneath, it operates as a very sophisticated surveillance technology. It's not the video that you're uploading that matters. What happens is once you have TikTok, they reserve the right through their terms of service to collect everything from search and browsing history, keystroke patterns. They say they reserve the right to get biometrics, including face prints and voice prints. And for years, TikTok was asked, is this secure? Is it being accessed by Beijing? And for years, TikTok's officials just gaslighted all of us in Washington, D.C. and said, don't worry, this data is not stored inside China. And over this past summer is really when things took a turn against TikTok, where there was internal TikTok communications that revealed everything is seen in China. So all this data that's being collected is being accessed by personnel.
Because they're saying like this, for instance, they're saying the facial recognition, well, we have filters. Of course we need facial recognition because we need to put ears on your head when you want the ears on your head, because and then you want to send it to your friends. But you're saying that facial, that now that data shows up in China. So if you ever went to China, they'd be like, that's that person.
Yeah, once the data goes back to Beijing, there's all sorts of nefarious purposes it can be put to: blackmail, espionage, all that. And TikTok was asked here in Congress recently, is this data being sent to the Chinese government? They said no. Okay, that's fine. They were asked, is it being sent to the CCP? They said no. Okay, that's fine. And they were asked the third question, which is it being sent back to people that are themselves members of the CCP? And TikTok said that they would prefer not to answer that
because it's being sent back to the company. What's the company?
ByteDance.
ByteDance. And as we understand it, basically all companies in China, I'm not saying all, are in some way affiliated with the CCP, because if they weren't, they wouldn't be companies. They would be out of business. So is that accurate?
Yeah, almost all of them have these CCP committees. They are embedded with CCP members. Even U.S. companies that have offices in Beijing, it's the same thing.
And at any moment, the CCP could be like, give us your data.
Right.
Well, oh no, we don't have to give you. Oh no, this is China. You do have to give us your data.
Exactly.
So.
And there's lots of other threats as well. So China has said that they want to dominate the world in artificial intelligence, or AI, by 2030, and they're going to use it for malign authoritarian purposes. They're already using AI to track and monitor and surveil their own people, and they want to use that technology abroad. So every time that you swipe on TikTok, every time you enter a search term on TikTok, that is going back to Beijing. It's feeding, it's training, it's improving their AI, which even outside of TikTok is going to be used down the road for nefarious purposes.
That's an interesting argument that I hadn't heard before, because on the one hand, a bunch of 16-year-olds are like, I don't care if they know who I am. Right. Like, I don't care. Like I have a Facebook profile. Everybody knows who I am on social media. I don't care. Actually, that's the whole point of my TikTok following is so people know who I am. And so it's hard to make that argument. You're making a different argument, which I find more compelling. Because even if I was a normal citizen too, like I wouldn't care. I'd be like, okay, tell me what's happening. Okay, China knows who I am. So what? Right. What? I have nothing to hide. Like I don't care. I do have things to hide now because I'm kind of anti-China and I'm a lawmaker, so I do care. But a normal citizen probably doesn't care. But you're saying, the argument you're making is interesting and worth touching upon a little bit. It's helping them. It's like that movie. What's that movie recently? I think it was just the end of Westworld. Like it was Westworld. It was like the final season of Westworld, which got really weird. I really liked Westworld, and then it was like, I don't know, it's just some weird futuristic dystopia. But but the entire point of it was they were building AI. They were building the most. I don't know if you've watched all the seasons. Okay, so do you even know what Westworld is?
A little bit.
Okay, so Westworld, it's a cool concept at first. Basically, they build this amusement park for where it's the Wild West, but they're all robots, but they're super smart robots, and you can go there and you can go into shootouts. You can do whatever the hell you want because they're all robots. Doesn't matter. But it gets darker and darker as the seasons go on. And then the robots like become self-aware. They try to escape. And what you realize is that it's been this like entire experiment to create the best AI possible, where you just know everything about everyone. You can predict their movements. You can predict what they're going to be, what they're going to do, everything. That's kind of what's happening here. This is Westworld. Oh yeah, so TikTok is Westworld, and then eventually like the robots themselves like kind of destroy the brain, and removing TikTok from America is kind of like destroying the brain of Westworld.
Right. So there's 3 or 4.
I'm so proud of myself for that analogy. By the way, I just came up with it right now.
We're going to use it.
Yeah, I'm really proud of myself.
There's sort of 3 or 4 distinct threats. I mean, the one that we talked about was once data goes back, espionage. The second that we talked about is training, feeding, and improving their AI. But there's a number of other ones as well. There was a recent report that had ByteDance officials in Beijing using TikTok to surveil the specific locations to surveil the location of specific Americans. Who those Americans were was not disclosed. So that's
right.
That's disturbing.
They say it's employees or something that they're worried about them going to strip clubs or something. But
right, the group that was doing the tracking usually does that. But this report was that these were not TikTok employees that they were surveilling. So that's worrisome. But the other area as well is their ability to use it for foreign influence campaign, including the content that they're sending to our children. Yeah. So obviously in China, TikTok doesn't exist, but there's a sister app.
That's what's crazy. That's what I wanted to bring up. It doesn't exist.
Right. It doesn't exist. There's a sister app called Douyin, which operates very similarly, except what it shows kids inside China is museum exhibits, science experiments, educational material, learning materials. Here in U.S., TikTok is showing kids things like the Blackout Challenge, which kids are doing, including underage kids that are on TikTok. And it's terrible, but they are suffocating themselves and in many cases killing themselves. There's been lawsuits against TikTok that have said you have intentionally served the Blackout Challenge to U.S. kids, including a girl that was 10 years old who killed herself because of this. And the court said,
I've never even heard of the Blackout Challenge. Am I really?
The court said even if those allegations are true, TikTok wouldn't be liable in part because of Section 230 and for other reasons. But to me, when you put all these 4 or 5 things together, including the content they're serving our kids and the distinction between what they're serving their own kids, this is why I've said this is China's digital fentanyl in terms of the content that they're feeding our young kids.
It is digital fentanyl because they also do the real fentanyl. That's also them. They're real assholes. So and that's worth bringing up again. I mean, it's the fact that they don't have the same version in their own country, and that's because they want to censor their country and all that. There's deeper underlying principles behind that, but they obviously see harm in this sort of like unfettered just this ecosystem where the most toxic things possible get posted, and it's not a mature environment. There's addiction problems that we have with our kids. It causes other kind of psychological problems that we're just beginning to understand because social media is still relatively new to the human brain. Yeah. I'm still I think the jury's still out on whether social media in general is a net benefit for humanity. And maybe it's a small net benefit, but there's some real problems that our brains can't figure out.
Yeah, and so this comes down to what do we do about it? And where things stand right now is the Biden administration's Treasury Department has been reviewing TikTok for a long time at this point. And there was a New York Times article a couple weeks ago that reported that the Treasury Department, through a process called CFIUS, which is the Committee on Foreign Investment, has a preliminary deal in place to allow TikTok to continue to operate. But that same report said that the number 2 at DOJ, Lisa Monaco, is concerned that that deal isn't tough enough. And subsequent to that report, you also had FBI Director Chris Wray testify here in Congress and say that the FBI has serious concerns with TikTok. So my guess is that the Biden administration...
The tide is really turning.
Yeah, I think the tide is turning.
Everybody was mad at Trump. Oh, Trump's just being, I don't know, whatever. Because everything Trump says, the left was against.
Right.
So...
Well, exactly. You've got Democrat Senator Mark Warner, chair of Senate Intel Committee, who's, gets a very serious briefings almost every single day. And he has said that it is TikTok, in his words, that scares the dickens out of him. So this is bipartisan. And I think the Biden administration is really struggling with what to do with TikTok. Given Chris Wray's statement from the FBI, given Mark Warner's statement, apparently the number 2, Lisa Monaco, DOJ, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to justify allowing TikTok to continue to operate, but yet that's where things are right now, is there's a deal in place that would allow them to do it. The crux of that deal is something called Project Texas, which would rely on Oracle servers and moving a lot of TikTok's operations there. The reason why I'm still concerned about that is a couple reasons. One, there was a recent report that, again, got leaked, internal communications from TikTok, that showed a TikTok official in L.A. asking another TikTok official outside of business hours, off location, detailed questions about the location and other information about those Oracle servers that would host the TikTok content, which to me strikes
that's crazy.
me that they are surveilling.
Right. They want to know how to get into the Oracle servers if that should happen.
Right. So the moment that we're negotiating to potentially do this, to house TikTok on these Oracle servers, if TikTok is in fact casing or surveilling them, we should say timeout, game over. We're not going down this path. And then finally, another leaked internal communication said that on Project Texas, even if we were to complete that process, an internal TikTok DC official said, at the end of the day, it remains to be seen if product and engineering, meaning Beijing, could still get access to the data, because at the end of the day, these are their tools. They built them in China. So I think this comes down to a basic IQ test. Do we trust...
Is there software backdoors that, it would take our engineers decades to go through to figure out... Because the coding is difficult.
Which is why I said I just don't see a path forward where we can be sufficiently...
Why is it called Project Texas? Are the Oracle servers in Texas?
It may be that's what it is, yeah. It could be.
Just Texas is the best.
But right, exactly.
So we just call things Texas.
As the gold standard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So, but aren't they already use Oracle servers, right? Like they already use their cloud service, but this would
be a deeper right now.
This would have Oracle U.S. control over it.
Yeah, right now Oracle hosts some of their content, but Oracle has no vision currently really into the way it works. This new version of using Oracle would put greater protections around the data in theory. So we haven't made that full transition yet. And
is there conversation? I mean, we heard about divesting it into a U.S. company away from the Chinese parent company. So let's, I don't know, let's imagine Facebook bought TikTok. They've already copied it like with Reels. So let's imagine they did that. Would that be better? Would that be okay? Or would the tools still...
I think it would be better if you could break the corporate link between TikTok and the algorithm and the CCP in Beijing. Then, I've got a lot of concerns about social media as you do, but I wouldn't have the national security.
Right, but we control that. So, well, we don't control them.
But that said, I don't see...
we have at least authority.
Right, and I don't see a path forward where TikTok and Beijing would ultimately agree to that. I just think that the surveillance value, the espionage value of the application, even if they aren't allowed to operate in the U.S., is too high to turn the keys over to that algorithm to any U.S.-based company.
This might be beyond your scope, but I've always been curious. Do you think Beijing artificially bumps the engagement numbers on TikTok? It seems to me that it's likely the case. Just the way people get followers, the way people get engagement in a way they just don't on other social media.
I'm sure. If you look at obviously where we started with some of the protests taking place right now in Beijing, there's no question that CCP authorities are controlling what is displayed on social media there and downplaying evidence of those protests.
Well, that's for sure.
And inserting other content to distract people.
Well, I just mean when you see like these TikTok stars with millions of followers and hundreds of thousands of likes, I've heard before that's artificially boosted to make you like the app better. Do you have any insight onto that?
I don't, but no, it sounds like it makes a lot of sense.
Just seems like a typical kind of bad business practices by the Chinese. Maybe we hit on these Chinese protests just for a minute. You were just in Taiwan,
right?
So what Give us some takeaways. I don't know what you were talking about with the Taiwanese there. I'm assuming it's telecom stuff. Right. So, but what came up?
Well, Taiwan is just an amazing story. I mean, it is a beacon of freedom and democracy that sits less than 100 miles from the shores of communist China. And obviously, China is engaged in very serious saber rattling right now when it comes to Taiwan. And I think when you look at our own strategic interests, in my view, it's very clear with Taiwan. Taiwan right now is the producer of 90% of advanced chips. So everything from smartphones to tablets, computers, everything really depends on a free Taiwan continuing to be there. And also when you look at shipping through the Taiwan Strait in that region, it's something like almost a quarter of global shipping goes there. So in terms of sort of vital U.S. security interests, it's clear. What I was there for was meeting with my counterparts focused principally on cybersecurity and network resiliency. It's no secret that after Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan a couple months ago, there was a serious ramp up in cyber activity and cyber intrusions flowing out of the CCP and doing it in a way that is more coordinated than ever before. And so I was meeting with my counterparts there, the Ministry of Digital Affairs, basically walking through some best practices and continuing to collaborate on cyber issues and cybersecurity issues and make sure we're learning from each other.
That's good. Glad to hear it. I mean, I had an interesting meeting with some Taiwanese. The question I always ask is, are you going to be like Ukrainians? Or will you fight to the death? Because that informs our decisions on how much support we want to give, and their answer is always yes. Their answer is always no. It's where we're not letting go of our hard-won freedom, and that's reassuring. But they do need some weapons, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the way I view it is, Xi is looking at Taiwan and he's making a very simple mathematical calculation, which he's measuring China's capacity. And he's measuring that against Taiwan's capacity plus the capacity of our allies, and capacity meaning fighting will, weapons, as you put
It's a
forward.
formula, yeah.
And once he views China's capacity as 1% greater than the capacity of those others, then he makes a move. And you're already seeing what he's doing to prepare for a Ukraine-type situation. They're banning, leaders in the CCP party from owning property and other assets outside of China so that they're not subject to sanctions and other things. And Taiwan is not historically, recently at least a very militaristic society. They have about, I think, 9 months or so of mandatory service now, but they're looking at increasing that mandatory military service.
They better figure it out real fast, because the Ukrainians had a very strong civil defense culture, in kind of like Texans. I mean, as I was like, you'll never invade Texas. And I didn't quite realize the extent that the Ukrainians had that as well until I went there and we talked about this. It was a main reason Kiev was never taken, is because it was just a bunch of civilians like, all right, I'm here for my gun.
Right.
And they just went for it.
Yeah, Taiwan needs to go full Texas and quickly. Look, if I believe that there was a significant risk of China making a move, where I live, I would have the sandbags out already, the machine guns ready.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's sort of the level of activity that we need to see getting ramped up from inside Taiwan.
Yeah. Okay. But this conversation is about telecoms. So let's talk, if we can move also to the general conversation about other Chinese technology, Huawei, ZTE. Yeah. We hear a lot better rhetoric coming out of places like Europe, right? Where I think it was a British, I don't know who it was. I just heard it on the radio, but it was a British guy. He had an accent, and he seemed like he had some authority. So I assume he was from the government.
Helps with that. Yeah.
The accent always helps. It always seems like, yeah, they can be nobody. But it was basically saying, look, this whole cooperation with China thing, this whole peaceful, it's over. It's all over. We're not doing it anymore. We're not saying they're enemies, but we're definitely not friends. It's over. And that seems to be the broad consensus. Seems to be Europe has woken up to the Chinese threat as well, even though we've, as Americans, have been beating the drum on this for a while. So where do we stand on that? Are we in a better place? What other countries do we have to worry about? I'm worried about South America. Where are we?
Yeah, you're right. The U.S. really led the way on taking an appropriately strong, tough approach to Huawei. We did this at the FCC a couple of years ago. And at first, we didn't get much traction globally on this issue, but COVID-19 really helped us turn the corner there. People looked at China. They realized that they were putting out a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and they're very concerned about it. And so Europe is now caught up to the U.S. in terms of taking a tough stance on Huawei. That's great. To your point, there's other parts of the world where it's sort of over to some extent in terms of how deeply embedded Huawei and the CCP are. You look at Africa, for instance. You look at South America, as you pointed out. I was in Nairobi, Kenya, about 2 hours outside of Nairobi, down this dusty road, small town, and there's just Huawei billboards everywhere. So there's a real risk when it comes to Africa and South America, but Europe's in a good situation. In the U.S., we're continuing to take tough action. In fact, just in the past couple of weeks at the FCC, we finally formally banned Huawei and ZTE gear from getting approved by the FCC for use in the U.S., and we took similar action on certain surveillance technology, Hikvision, Hytera, and Dowwow, their surveillance cameras. Now, a lot of people say, well, didn't the FCC ban Huawei already? And I say, sort of. What we did a couple years ago was we stopped allowing federal subsidies to be used to purchase Huawei gear. And that went a long way because really Huawei was selling into these smaller rural telcos that needed subsidies to buy. So by ending those subsidies 2 or 3 years ago, people felt like we'd banned Huawei, but there was a loophole, which was the same companies could buy the same gear without federal subsidies and put that same gear in the same point in their network. And so we finally took action at the FCC and said, look, there's no device that can be used in this country that doesn't get an FCC seal of approval, a microphone, a laptop. And we've said we are no longer going to approve going forward Huawei ZTE gear, and that stops everybody in the U.S. from using it for any purpose.
And the question, like, Mexicans or Colombians would have is, okay, fine, you don't want me to buy Huawei, what should I buy?
Yeah.
And do we have a great answer for that?
We're seeing some increased competition in that space. There's this new trend towards this technology called O-RAN, which basically is looking to replace the performance of Huawei and ZTE in these expensive boxes with cheap boxes but high-performance software. And so we are seeing some increased competition and choice to non-Huawei, non-ZTE.
Who makes that?
So that can be made by anybody because it's software. So you don't need to be a $15 billion a year hardware company to do it. So there's a range of smaller, including U.S. providers that are very good on software that can now compete in this space.
Oh, that's interesting. I loved it to see when there's just this leapfrog effect in technology where we just you know what, let's not compete with that technology, just bypass it, right? And that's usually the best thing for Americans because we're usually the best at that.
And these steps are so important. I mean, a lot of people sort of step back and say, well, what is the real threat with Huawei, with ZTE? And I was, up at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls, Montana. I mean, this is maybe about 100 or 200 miles from the border with Canada. I mean, just nothing up there. It's wheat fields, big sky country, except, dotted throughout that area are ICBM missile silos. And there's, men and women that are sitting there underground, ready to push the button at any moment. And again, there's nothing up there except dotted throughout all of that as well were cell towers running high-power Huawei and other gear that was over-provisioned for the needs of providing cell service to, the small, sparsely populated areas up there. So that's an example of where, Huawei was starting to deeply embed in suspicious places in this country.
Yeah, I mean, you see some cases where the U.S. government doesn't allow the Chinese to buy property near military bases, but there's a big push to let them buy even less.
Yeah. But it's a phenomenon. I mean, you look now, and switching sort of back to TikTok a little bit, you see a lot of sort of government officials now, particularly on the left side of the aisle, that are on TikTok because they believe it's a way of sort of reaching young voters. But it's ironic because these same people, they don't actually put TikTok on their phones. They take these videos and they send it to other people, or they use burner phones. But to me, that's got to be the biggest admission of a problem. If you're not willing, to put TikTok on your phone, then that's a problem. In fact,
I thought about the same thing because I'm like, I got to reach these people. But I also am like, God, I don't have time to create even more content than we already create. There's reasons for that. But yeah, even if we did do it, I would definitely put it on a burner phone. Yeah. And it does. It kind of makes you a hypocrite, too, if you're using it. But you are, and as a public figure, you are in a difficult position because you do want to reach people. You do realize, a quarter of young people say they get their news from TikTok.
It's amazing.
They haven't transitioned. I mean, like Instagram tried to basically compete with TikTok with using Reels. I don't know how competitive it's been. I mean, obviously, I think people just use both, but I don't know.
think it's so complicated to some extent for the Biden administration because on the one hand, you've got economic considerations where you have economic agencies that always tend to want to be not tough on China. You got the national security agencies and FBI that want to be tough, but now you've got this third element of this political consideration where some people are saying you need to be on TikTok to reach young voters. I think that debate right now, economic, NatSec, political, is taking place in the Biden administration. I just hope that they end up in the right spot here and take an appropriately tough stance on TikTok. Some people say that the window for the administration to act is post-election before Republicans in the House get gavels, and we'll see if they land it in that window or not. It could also just kick on here for another number of months.
I don't know why. Again, it should be bipartisan. What's our progress with getting companies like Apple and Google to cooperate on here? I mean, you've pushed for them to take it off their app store entirely.
Yeah, this is one thing I did. You mentioned this earlier. I wrote a letter to Apple a while back and said, look, you may not be an expert on national security. I'm not asking you to make a decision on that and boot TikTok for that reason per se, but what you are an expert on is your terms of service. And Apple has a history of where an application is sending data to places or pinging servers that it hasn't been disclosed to the user, they kick that app off the App Store. And I said, obviously, these revelations about TikTok and these data flows back to Beijing should be enough for you to apply your terms of service and boot them from that basis. But plainly, Apple has not taken that action, although, at least according to Elon Musk, they are suggesting in some form or another they may take action against Twitter, which to me is highly ironic.
That's crazy.
If you're pulling advertising dollars or support from Twitter while keeping or expanding it on TikTok, then you are certainly sending a signal about brand values. I just don't think it's the one that you intend.
I mean, what do you think about Apple's business model in general? They're probably the most reliant company on China.
It's concerning. And before I sent Apple a letter on TikTok, I actually sent them another one, which had to do with the censorship that they're engaging in with their app store in China. There's an application called Voice of America, which is actually an operation run by U.S. Alliance for Global Media. It's funded by Congress, but it's an independent journalistic endeavor.
Right.
Anyways, Apple has removed the VOA app from the Chinese App Store at the request of the CCP. And the reason why, at least according to my understanding, is because the VOA app comes with built-in VPN and security protections that China doesn't want people to have. Similarly, you see right now these, again, unprecedented protests taking place in China, and yet Apple has ended your ability to share via airdrop broadly photographs with each other. And so I think it's pretty clear to me that Apple is certainly a cog in the censorship wheel of the Communist Party. And I just don't think it's a good thing. And they will give you all sorts of flowery rhetoric. We stand for human rights. We defend democracy, global peace through global trade. And I think their rhetoric founders on their own conduct in China and their willingness to engage in censorship at the behest of the CCP. Yeah,
well, they're a very green company, but not in the environmental sense. It's like if they make money off of it, but it's disgusting. I mean, the airdrop thing is really that's a pretty morally speaking, that's reprehensible. Yeah. So you're not allowing people who are fighting for their lives at this point. I believe these protests are sparked because they've been locking people up in their apartments for this insane COVID policy. Yeah. Which, I don't mind the Chinese kind of screwing themselves, but it's also screwing up our supply chains. I mean, it's just been a mess for the world. And look, the Chinese people are innocent, and they don't deserve that kind of treatment. Yeah. But, they should rebel, and that's what they're doing now. And for Apple to be complicit in basically taking down the rebellion, because what do we say about all whether it's Cuba or Venezuela or Iran or China or wherever or Hong Kong when that was happening? What can we do, right? Are we going to send in the SEAL team? No, we're not going to send in anything really. But what we can do is help them communicate. Yes. And, at the very least, do nothing. At least let them use what they have. And to the fact that Apple is not even letting them use airdrop, that is crazy.
It really is, and you're right. When you look around the world today and freedom movements spark, whether it's in Cuba and Venezuela, as you noted, the very first thing that happens is people take to the streets and they pull out their smartphones and they start recording videos and they start sharing images. And the very first thing that authoritarian regimes attempt to do is to shut that down, either filtering messaging apps. And so the most important thing that we can do is to support the free flow of communications over those modern technologies. And the idea that Apple is stepping in and blocking that is really disturbing. And I think you see a lot of U.S. companies that are doing the opposite. Obviously, Starlink, Elon Musk's satellite operation, delivering satellites to Ukraine to help them communicate freely. That's the model of what we should be attempting to do here.
Oh, I said I wanted to talk about that. Can you give me your sense on, maybe that'll be the last topic we hit. I just heard boats get called. But Starlink, it seems pretty awesome. Kind of depends on where you are in the world. It depends on a few things. I mean, help the audience. I think people kind of know what it is, But what does it take to get it? Like, can I just have a subscription to Starlink? What's going on with Starlink right now?
Yeah, it's a really phenomenal new technology. We've obviously had satellite delivered broadband for years, but it's been very, very slow. And what the breakthrough is with Starlink is it's legitimate high speed internet service, and we've been authorizing it at the FCC. But it's great for sort of rural communities that otherwise can't get it. But also, I think it's an important tool in our arsenal when it comes to addressing these authoritarian regimes that, rather than sending in troops or bombs, you enable broadband and free communication over that technology accelerates the downfall of regimes that govern without the consent of their people. So I think it's a great technology, and we need to continue to stand behind it at the FCC. And frankly, I think the U.S. government needs to have in its arsenal this ability strategically to stand up communication services in these authoritarian countries.
And so what does it take? You need a server on the ground that speaks to the satellites, and Elon can just like direct the satellites to a certain region?
Yeah, there's a couple things you need, but in the main for the user, you have basically a small pizza box size dish, and anywhere you can put that and plug that into a power source, you can go directly from that dish to the satellite, and then effectively that dish is a hotspot that can power your smartphone or laptop or technology.
I've seen it. I've talked about the maritime industry using it. Their bills go from like thousands of dollars a month on bigger ships for internet to like $60 a month.
Exactly.
It's crazy. And this is profitable to Elon?
We'll see. At this point, I think their goal is just not to bankrupt themselves, and we'll see if it ends up being profitable. We had awarded them actually some federal subsidies at the FCC, about $800 million, in exchange for a commitment for them to bring this service to thousands of locations across the country. And the FCC, under the new Democrat leadership, revoked that award that we had given them.
Like the one good money we're spending on infrastructure.
That's the thing. So you have all these billions and billions of dollars for infrastructure. If these same people ever get service again, my back of the envelope math is it's going to cost us somewhere north of $3 billion in federal subsidies to do it, when we had an $800 million agreement with Starlink to provide them high-speed service. So let's just
do things as stupidly as possible. Another thing I learned today about the infrastructure bill is it actually banned this like new technology of autonomous electric trains, because we're talking about the railway strike is the big topic right now. And somebody brought up, in the infrastructure bill, you can't build that. That's Elon Musk also, by the way. Right. You can't build those because there's no union workers out working on them, because they're autonomous and they're good for the environment. But good job, Democrats. You're a bunch of idiots. So I guess my last question on Starlink is this and I think we sort of talked about this, but is this the real answer for rural broadband? Because there's, the other conversation is always about, laying fiber down, hundreds of miles to service like 30 people, just incredibly cost inefficient. So is this really the only answer? Is going to be this low orbit satellite kind of broadband?
I think Starlink and similar low Earth orbit technologies is the answer for that last, 1 to 2% of the country, because, there's such a, to your point out, a long tail where you reach those last couple of communities with fiber. It's expensive. I think the lion's share of all connections here are going to be fiber. We've got billions of dollars in infrastructure to potentially do it, but this administration is basically saying we want fiber and only fiber to exist. And if you do that, we're going to run out of the hundreds of billions of dollars, and we're going to leave these people stuck on the wrong side of the digital divide. The reality is we have the technology right now, whether it's Starlink or this new sort of fixed wireless technology, which is similar but terrestrial, to bring families across the digital divide right now. So if what you're saying is we only want fiber, which is a great technology, what you're really saying is just
for the cities,
right?
For cities and suburbs,
right? But if you're saying only fiber, what you're saying to those families is just stay waiting on the wrong side of that digital divide for years longer than necessary. When we get it to you, if we get it to you, it'll be really good. But that's why we need to put back on the table all of the different technologies, Starlink, fixed wireless, and fiber, and get the right mix based on the geography and the cost. But right now, this administration is really heavy thumb on the scale for fiber. I think that's a mistake, and it's going to leave people behind.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Optimistic place to leave. All right. Hey, Brendan, thanks so much for being on. We hit a lot of different topics that I think are very educational. Good for the audience. Appreciate you coming on again.
Thanks so much. Enjoyed it.